Lately, I've been thinking about how having a flock of chickens has impacted my life in so many ways. We have a little mini storm rolling in right now, so I'm going to try and get this video done before I get completely blown away. So if you see some wind happening, that's what's going on. Thunderstorm is coming. Hopefully not before we finish this video. Now, I've always had chickens pretty much my whole life. It's just the done thing around here. I'm from a little town. It's just what people do. They have a small flock of hens in the backyard to lay eggs. Really common. It's sort of the background. You don't really think about it too much. And that's pretty much how I had my chickens. I had 5 chickens like a normal person, because 5 chickens is about the number an average family would need to keep them in eggs. And that's just what I did. I cruised, had my flock of chickens, they laid eggs, it was all good. Then I started to get interested in growing my own food. So gardening, getting really into sort of a biological, integrated, ecological way of growing food. And I realized that livestock are just essential to having a system that works well for growing food. So you don't have to go out to the store to buy fertilizer and this thing and that thing and all the stuff that they tell you need to grow a garden. If you have livestock to drive your system, you can garden with very, very minimal inputs from the store. And that was pretty incredible when I started to put those two things together. I started with my gardening. It was going okay. It wasn't going great. And then I started to really look at how the chickens could contribute to the whole system of growing food for my family. And then we started to have a few more chickens than just 5 to where we have today. I think the current number is 24. In the breeding season, that can bump up to 40 or so. It can get a little chaotic. But I needed that many to drive the garden because I started off, I was like, oh, well, these few tomatoes, these few cucumbers, these few peppers, it kept us in fresh vegetables just for the summer. And that was fine. But when I started to integrate the chickens into that growing system with my composting chicken run, with how they run around depositing their fertilizer all over the place, the garden just burst into the most crazy abundance. And I had so much produce. So much produce. I had tomatoes, buckets and buckets of tomatoes every few days. There were cucumbers, there were peppers. The greens are constant. I've got some greens right here that I'm letting the chickens have a nibble at, and these are I don't even have to plant them anymore. They seed themselves and away they go. It's so much in the garden. It blows my mind. So I started to think, well, I have all of this. We can't possibly eat all of this. So I got into food preserving, which again is not a weird thing to do around here. But as lives get busier and, we're not immune in New Zealand to the chaos and the busyness that is around the world. It wasn't so common anymore. Preserving food was something I learned to do as a child, but hadn't really done as an adult because the culture had sort of moved on. But I was like, what am I going to do with all these tomatoes? It's like so many tomatoes. So I started making my own passata, like a pasta sauce from the tomatoes, making salsa, making cucumber pickles, and putting that away for when we didn't have abundant tomatoes in the garden and all the rest of it. And I made so much. We've actually made it through the entire year with the passata from last season. It's really incredible. I'm going to keep doing it. It's really empowering. But without me starting to put those things together and the power of the chickens to drive this ridiculous abundance, I wouldn't have sort of started to do that again. I wouldn't have had that experience of how fulfilling it is to do things for yourself from start to finish. It was really inspiring. Now, if I hadn't put those systems together, I wouldn't have discovered the abundance. There wouldn't have been the push. I wouldn't have been successful at gardening because, it's a learning curve when you start growing your own food. And whilst I've always been around gardens, I was even as a job working in commercial agriculture for quite a while, but that is a different beast from growing it in your own backyard where you don't want to use chemicals and pesticides and even fertilizers that can be not so great for your soil. When you're growing that food for yourself, for your family, you want it to just be the best food you can possibly get. And that's not that easy. It's a learning curve to learn how to grow it that way. And without the chicken flock providing the foundation, I guess the inspiration for that growing system, I would have had lots of problems and maybe I would have given up. Because if your tomato costs like $30 because that's how much you had to buy at the store to make it happen, you're probably not going to grow that many tomatoes. But that's not how it works here. The chickens provide all the fertility for the garden. So I buy feed for the chickens, maybe a little bit more feed than I used to buy when I only had 5. But that feed for the chickens, it turns into eggs that the chickens lay. It turns into new chickens that replace the flock members that are getting old, or I can find new homes for, which can bring in a small amount of cash income. A small amount, you're not going to get rich breeding chickens, but it helps. And every bag of feed gives me more chickens, gives me eggs, and gives me all the fertilizer that my garden needs. It gives me all the mulch that the fruit trees need. It's just amazing. Those systems start stacking together to create something truly magical. Another huge inspiration that having the chicken flock has had for me is I was maintaining my lawn as a pasture for the chickens to have nice, yummy food to eat with their greens. But it's so much grass because they're constantly wandering around fertilizing it. And I'm like, what am I gonna do with all of this amazing grass? It seems kind of wasteful just to sort of like put it back into the soil constantly, which is good for the soil, but like that just keeps the fertility going and it's just getting a little bit out of control. There's like too much fertility happening. And then an opportunity came up to have a part ownership share in a milk cow. And I was like, okay, well that is where all this abundance forage, this grass, this clover, it can go to the milk cow. And that has just been so amazing. I cut the grass, take it to the cow, and then that grass, which is ultimately coming from the efforts of the chickens, from a fertility perspective, is now turning into milk for my family, and maybe it turns into more cows that we might get to eat, which would be quite tasty. But it's just all coming from the efforts of the chickens, driving this whole system of incredible fertility. Another big change that having that flock of chickens, that building up their numbers and getting into the gardening has done for me is, well, it's this video. It is me telling you about this experience right now on YouTube. I would never have dreamed of getting on camera and hosting these videos and telling you all about my experiences if I didn't have the flock of chickens and wasn't doing this sort of stuff. Because when I would hop on, if I had a question or something, and I would go on YouTube to maybe find the answer, everything was like really dramatic and not that useful in most cases. And I was thinking to myself, like, you know, I've had chickens my whole life. Like, they're really not that complicated. They're very easy animals to keep. I've just done a video about this exact topic, you know. They're not that dramatic. They're easy. Everyone can have chickens. But I was seeing a lot of these channels popping up from people who had got their chickens in the 2020 chicken craze, influenced by some of the supply chain issues we had in 2020. And you know, it was just a lot of people saying a lot of stuff, and a lot of that stuff wasn't necessarily accurate, or it was overblown for effect, you know, to get the click. And hey, if you want to do that, that's cool, but that is not what we're about here. And I thought, well, look, I could offer something to this space. Maybe I will try have a YouTube channel. And here we are today, and you know what? It's going fantastically. I'm so happy that you all want to come and watch me talk about chickens and gardens and all the other stuff I talk about. It's really incredible. And I'm really, really grateful that I took the plunge to do it, because you know what? It's scary. It's scary doing this. I had never been on camera before. I'd never done any of this before. And now I have done it, and I'm getting comfortable doing it. And I hope that what I'm bringing to the space is helpful, but I think it is, because this channel is great and you, my audience, are fantastic, and I'm really enjoying doing this and putting it out into the world and just seeing what happens.